Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. Kyle Mason pressed his palm against the steering wheel, watching the yellow glow from his daughter's bedroom window flicker through the curtains. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since Amy stopped looking him in the eye. The change had been gradual at first. His 12-year-old daughter, who used to greet him at the door with stories about her day, started retreating to her room the moment he came home. Their dinner conversations, once filled with her excited chatter about art class and her best friend Shannon's latest drama, had withered into uncomfortable silences. When he asked questions, she'd respond in monosyllables, her gaze fixed on her plate. Kyle had initially chalked it up to preteen moodiness. After all, Amy was at that age where hormones and social dynamics could create emotional whiplash. But then came the flinching. Last Tuesday, he'd reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, something he'd done 1,000 times before, and she'd jerked away as if he'd raised a hand to strike her. The fear in her eyes had been unmistakable, and it had cut him deeper than any physical wound. That night, lying awake in a master bedroom he'd once shared with his wife Laura, Kyle had started reviewing the past month. He was a mechanical engineer, trained to identify patterns and solve problems systematically. What he found troubled him deeply. Amy's changes coincided with the start of summer break. No school meant more time at home, which should have been good. But instead, she seemed increasingly anxious. She'd started having nightmares. He could hear her crying out in the early morning hours. When he went to comfort her, she'd pretend to be asleep, her body rigid under the covers. Kyle ran a successful engineering consulting firm from his home office, designing custom manufacturing solutions for aerospace companies. It gave him flexibility to be present for Amy, especially after Laura's death 3 years ago in a car accident. He'd restructured his entire life around being the father Amy needed. Laura's death had devastated them both. She'd been driving home from her mother Vera's house in the rain when her car had skidded off the mountain road. The investigation ruled it an accident. Wet roads, poor visibility, a sharp curve. Kyle had been shattered, but he'd focused on Amy, getting her therapy, making sure she felt loved and secure. But lately, Amy's therapist, Dr. Joyce Gorman, had called him with concerns. Amy had been displaying signs of anxiety and depression that seemed to be worsening. When Dr. Gorman gently probed, Amy would shut down completely. The therapist recommended they continue sessions, but admitted she was puzzled by the sudden regression. Kyle also noticed Amy constantly checking her phone, texting someone obsessively. When he'd asked who she was talking to, she'd mumbled, "Just Grandma," before quickly locking the screen. Vera Byers, his mother-in-law, had been a complicated presence in their lives since day one. A former real estate magnate in her early 60s, Vera was sharp, controlling, and had never fully approved of Kyle's marriage to Laura. She'd wanted Laura to marry someone wealthier, more suitable, meaning someone from their same affluent social circle rather than a middle-class engineer who'd worked his way through college. After Laura's death, Vera had become more involved in Amy's life. At first, Kyle had been grateful for the support. Vera would take Amy for weekends, buy her clothes, take her to museums. But there was something in the way Vera looked at him during pickups, a cold assessment that made him feel like he was being measured and found wanting. 6 months ago, Vera had suggested she should get custody of Amy. "You're a single father with a demanding career," she'd said, her tone dripping with false concern. "Amy needs a woman's influence. I can provide her with opportunities you simply can't afford." Kyle had politely but firmly declined. He'd raised his voice only once, telling Vera that Amy was his daughter and he would never give her up. Vera had smiled, a thin, predatory expression, and said, "We'll see about that." Now, sitting in his car with a cold cup of coffee in the cup holder, Kyle wondered if Vera was behind Amy's change in behavior. He decided to test his theory. That morning, he told Amy he had to fly to Seattle for an emergency client meeting and would be gone for 3 days. Her reaction had been telling. Visible relief had washed across her face before she caught herself and mumbled a goodbye. Kyle had packed an overnight bag for show, loaded it into his Tesla, and driven to his office downtown. There, he'd spent the afternoon redirecting his calls and rescheduling meetings. His assistant, Margie Ellison, a motherly woman in her 50s who'd worked with him for a decade, had asked if everything was okay. Just some personal matters I need to handle, he told her. Margie had studied his face with concern, but hadn't pressed. She'd been there, through Laura's death, had seen him rebuild his life. She trusted him. Now, it was 7 p.m., and Kyle had parked his car 3 houses down from his own, obscured by the overgrown hedge of a foreclosed property. His home was a modest 2-story craftsman in a quiet neighborhood northeast of downtown Portland. He'd bought it 8 years ago, back when Amy was 4 and Laura was pregnant with what would have been their second child, a pregnancy that ended in miscarriage. The street was tree-lined and peaceful. Their neighbors were mostly young families and retirees. To Kyle's right, 2 houses down, lived Eugene Hull, an 83-year-old widower who'd been on the block for 40 years. Eugene was sharp as a tack despite his age, a retired postal worker who spent his days tending an immaculate garden and keeping casual watch over the neighborhood. Kyle's phone buzzed. A text from Amy. Made mac and cheese for dinner. Going to bed early. Have a good trip. His chest tightened. Amy used to be terrified of being alone at night. After Laura died, he'd had to sleep on the floor next to her bed for months until she felt secure enough to sleep on her own. Now, she was volunteering to be alone, unless she wasn't going to be alone. Kyle settled in for a long wait. The summer sun was finally setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He brought a thermos of coffee, some protein bars, and a portable phone charger. His mind wandered to Laura. They'd met at a friend's wedding when he was 26, and she was 24. Laura had been funny and warm, with an infectious laugh and a talent for painting landscapes. She'd worked as an art teacher at a private elementary school, and she'd loved it. They dated for 2 years before getting married in a small ceremony that Vera had barely attended, citing a business conflict. Laura's relationship with her mother had always been strained. Vera was a woman who measured worth in dollars and status. She'd built a small real estate empire in her 30s after divorcing Laura's father, a man Kyle had never met and whom Laura rarely mentioned. Vera had raised Laura as a single mother, instilling in her a complex mix of ambition and insecurity. Laura had rebelled by choosing a creative career and marrying for love rather than money. But she'd never fully escaped Vera's gravitational pull. They'd had dinner together every week, calls every few days. After Amy was born, Vera had softened slightly, doting on her granddaughter in her own rigid way. The accident had happened after one of those weekly dinners. Laura had texted Kyle that she was leaving Vera's house at 8:45 p.m. By 10:15 p.m., when she still wasn't home and wasn't answering her phone, Kyle had started to worry. The police had called at 11:30 p.m. Her car had gone off the road at a notorious curve on Highway 26, tumbling down a steep embankment. She died on impact. The investigating officer had shown Kyle the skid marks, explained how the wet conditions had caused her to lose control. It happened every few years on that same curve, he'd said. Tragic, but not suspicious. Vera had been devastated, or appeared to be. She'd wept at the funeral, delivered a eulogy, praising Laura's kindness and creativity. But in the months that followed, her attention had shifted almost entirely to Amy and increasingly away from Kyle. Kyle shook his head, bringing himself back to the present. He checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. 15 minutes later, he saw movement. Eugene Hull was walking down the sidewalk with his terrier, Chester. The old man paused at the end of Kyle's driveway, looking toward the house, then continued on. As he approached Kyle's car, Eugene's pace slowed. He glanced at the Tesla, seemed to recognize it, and walked directly to the driver's side window. Kyle rolled it down. "Evening, Kyle," Eugene said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Thought that was your car. Heard you were supposed to be in Seattle." "You heard that. Amy mentioned it when I saw her this afternoon. I was trimming my roses, and she was getting the mail. Asked where you were headed." Eugene paused, his sharp eyes studying Kyle. "But here you are." Kyle saw no point in lying to the old man. "Something's not right with Amy, Eugene. I needed to see what happens when I'm supposedly away." Eugene nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd been thinking. "Your mother-in-law, Vera Byers. She arrives at 9 p.m. every night. Has been for the past 3 weeks." He glanced at his watch. "Should be here in about 8 minutes. Wait, you'll understand." Kyle's pulse quickened. "Every night." Every single night. Stays about 2 hours, leaves around 11. Eugene's expression darkened. I didn't think much of it at first. Grandmother visiting granddaughter seemed natural. But last week, I was up late with indigestion, sitting on my porch around midnight. I saw Amy in her bedroom window. He paused. Kyle, she was just standing there, staring out. Not moving, like she was in a trance. A chill ran down Kyle's spine. Did she see you? I don't think so. I called out, but she didn't respond. Then the light went off suddenly, and she was gone. Eugene's hand trembled slightly on Chester's leash. I've seen a lot in my years, Kyle. That wasn't normal. I was going to say something to you, but you're always working, and I didn't want to overstep. I appreciate you telling me now, Kyle said. His mind was racing. Every night for 3 weeks. 2-hour visits after 9 p.m., when Amy should be getting ready for bed. There's something else, Eugene added. About a week ago, I saw Vera leaving. She was carrying a bag, looked like a medical bag, the kind doctors use for house calls. Struck me as odd. Before Kyle could respond, headlights swept across the street. A silver Mercedes sedan pulled into his driveway. Vera Byers emerged from the driver's seat, moving with purpose. She was dressed in black slacks and a cream blouse, her silver hair styled perfectly. She carried a leather bag that could indeed be a medical bag. But it was what happened next that made Kyle's blood run cold. Vera walked to the front door and used a key to let herself in. Kyle didn't remember giving her a key. The door closed behind her. Eugene's hand gripped Kyle's shoulder through the window. I'll leave you to it. But Kyle, be careful. There's something very wrong here. The old man walked away with his dog, leaving Kyle alone with his thoughts. Through Amy's bedroom window, he could see the light was still on. Then Vera appeared in the window, closing the curtains. Kyle sat in his car, hands clenched on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to burst into his house and demand answers. But he was an engineer, trained to gather data before acting. Whatever was happening, he needed to understand it fully before he made his move. He pulled out his phone and opened an app he'd installed on Amy's phone 6 months ago, a basic parental monitoring system that Laura's therapist had recommended after Amy had mentioned some cyberbullying at school. He'd barely used it, respecting Amy's privacy. But now he needed information. The app showed Amy's recent text messages. His stomach dropped as he scrolled through the conversations with Vera. Vera, remember what we talked about? Your father is dangerous. Amy, I know. I'm scared. Vera, I'll protect you. Just do what I say. Amy, when will this be over? Vera, soon. Be patient. I love you so much. The messages went back weeks. Kyle's hands shook as he read them. Dangerous? He'd never raised a voice to Amy in anger, never come close to hurting her. What lies had Vera been feeding his daughter? He scrolled further and found messages that chilled him even more. Vera, did you take your medicine? Amy, yes. It makes me feel weird. Vera, it's helping you remember things clearly. Your father has been manipulating you. Amy, I had another dream. Mom was crying. She was scared of Dad. Vera, see? Your mind is starting to remember the truth. Medicine? What medicine? And these dreams about Laura being scared of him. That was a complete fabrication. He and Laura had argued occasionally, like any married couple, but their relationship had been loving and strong. Kyle realized with growing horror what was happening. Vera was drugging Amy and using those drugs combined with suggestion to implant false memories. It was psychological manipulation on a disturbing level. But why? He thought back to Laura's will. She'd left everything in a trust for Amy. Approximately $850,000 from life insurance, savings, and the sale of some property Laura had inherited from her grandmother. The trust was locked until Amy turned 18, with Kyle as the sole trustee. He could use funds for Amy's health, education, and welfare, but he couldn't access the money for himself. Vera had contested the will briefly after Laura's death, arguing she should be co-trustee, but the court had sided with Laura's clearly written intentions. Vera had backed off, but Kyle remembered the look in her eyes during that hearing, cold fury barely concealed. If Vera could prove Kyle was an unfit parent, she could petition for custody. And if she had custody of Amy, she could control Amy and eventually control that money. Kyle took a deep breath, forcing himself to think logically. He needed proof of what Vera was doing. He needed to protect Amy. And he needed to do it in a way that ensured Vera couldn't wiggle free or manipulate the situation further. An idea began forming in his mind. Vera thought she was clever, thought she'd cornered him. But she'd made a mistake. She'd underestimated him, just as she'd always done. Kyle started his car and drove away from his street, heading toward a 24-hour pharmacy. He had work to do. The next morning, Kyle sat in a booth at a downtown diner, across from Anthony Daly, a private investigator he'd worked with years ago on a corporate theft case. Anthony was in his mid-40s, a former detective who'd left the police force to start his own firm. He was discreet, thorough, and ruthless when necessary. "Let me get this straight," Anthony said, stirring his coffee. "You think your mother-in-law is drugging your daughter to brainwash her into believing you're dangerous?" "I don't think. I know." Kyle slid his phone across the table, showing Anthony the text messages he'd screenshotted. Anthony studied them, his expression darkening. "This is seriously messed up. But gathering evidence that'll hold up legally is tricky. We're talking about a child's testimony, recovered memories, and a grandmother who probably has expensive lawyers. That's why I need your help," Kyle said. "I need to know everything about what Vera's doing. I need cameras in my house that she won't detect. I need to document every visit. And I need to know what drug she's giving Amy." "The drug is the key," Anthony agreed. "If we can prove she's administering medication without a prescription or your consent, that's felony child abuse. But we need a sample." Kyle had thought about this all night. "Tonight, I'll go home after Vera leaves. Amy will be asleep, probably drugged. I'll search her room for whatever Vera is giving her. Pills, liquid, whatever. You can have it analyzed. I have a contact at a toxicology lab. They can identify it and provide a report that'll hold up in court." Anthony pulled out a notepad. "What about surveillance? If she's using a key you didn't give her, she's trespassing. We can get her on breaking and entering, but the real crime is what she's doing to Amy. How small can you make the cameras?" "Tiny. I can install pinhole cameras that look like smoke detectors, wall outlets, even books on a shelf. She'll never spot them." Anthony leaned forward. "But Kyle, you need to understand, once we start this, there's no going back. Vera will fight. This is going to get ugly." "It's already ugly," Kyle said flatly. "She's destroying my daughter's mind. She's making Amy fear me. I don't care how ugly it gets. I'm going to stop her, and I'm going to make sure she pays for what she's done." Anthony studied him for a moment. "All right, I'll need access to your house today while both Amy and Vera are out. You said Amy has a summer camp program?" "She goes to an art camp 3 days a week, Tuesday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Today's Tuesday." "Perfect. Give me your house key. I'll have everything installed by 2 p.m. Anthony paused. "One more thing. What's your endgame here? You get evidence, you call the police, she gets arrested. But this is going to traumatize Amy further. She's going to need serious help." Kyle had thought about this too. "Dr. Gorman, Amy's therapist, she's good. Once we have proof of what Vera's done, I'll bring in Dr. Gorman to help Amy understand she's been manipulated. Kids are resilient. Amy will recover, especially once she realizes I'm not the monster Vera's painted me to be. And Vera," Kyle's jaw tightened, "I want her to pay for this. Prison time. I want her to lose everything, the way she tried to make me lose Amy." Anthony nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." That evening, Kyle sat in his car again, parked in the same spot. Anthony's work had been flawless. 5 cameras were now hidden throughout the house, feeding to a secure cloud server that only Kyle and Anthony could access. 1 in the living room, 1 in the kitchen, 2 in Amy's room from different angles, and 1 in the hallway. Audio recording was enabled on all of them. Kyle had returned home that afternoon, making a show of arriving from his business trip. Amy had been distant, but not as fearful as before. He'd made dinner, tried to engage her in conversation, but she'd retreated to her room by 7 p.m. Now, supposedly on his way to meet a client for drinks, Kyle waited. At exactly 9:02 p.m., Vera's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Kyle watched her enter the house with her key. On his phone, he pulled up the live feed from the cameras. Vera went straight to Amy's room. Amy was sitting at her desk, earbuds in, doing homework. When Vera entered, Amy looked up and smiled. A smile Kyle hadn't seen his daughter direct at anyone in weeks. "Hi, Grandma," Amy said, pulling out her earbuds. "Hello, sweetheart." Vera set her bag down on Amy's bed and pulled out a small bottle. "Time for your medicine." Kyle watched, his hands clenched into fists, as Vera poured a small amount of clear liquid into a cup and handed it to Amy. His daughter drank it without question, making a face at the taste. "I know it's not pleasant," Vera said soothingly, stroking Amy's hair, "but it's helping you remember the truth about your father, how he treated your mother." "I had another dream," Amy said, her voice small. "Mom and Dad were fighting. He pushed her." Kyle's breath caught. That had never happened. Never. "Yes," Vera said softly. "Your mind is uncovering memories you suppressed. Traumatic memories your brain hid to protect you. But you need to remember them now. You need to be safe. When can I come live with you?" Amy asked. "Soon. I'm working with lawyers to prove your father isn't fit to care for you. These memories you're recovering will help. When the time comes, you'll need to tell the judge what you remember. Can you do that?" Amy nodded, though she looked uncertain. "I can try." "Good girl." Vera kissed the top of her head. "Now, let's do our exercises." For the next hour, Kyle watched in mounting fury as Vera engaged Amy in what could only be described as coaching sessions. She asked leading questions about Kyle. "Do you remember feeling afraid when your father raised his voice?" And praised Amy whenever she provided an answer that painted Kyle in a negative light. The drug Vera had given Amy seemed to make her more susceptible to suggestion. Her responses became more elaborate as the evening went on, spinning increasingly disturbing tales of emotional abuse that had never occurred. Around 10:30 p.m., Amy began to look drowsy. Vera tucked her into bed, whispering, "Remember, your father is dangerous. But I'll keep you safe. I love you." "Love you too, Grandma," Amy murmured, her eyes already closing. Vera left the room, and Kyle watched her check the hallway before slipping into his home office. She opened drawers, clearly searching for something. His financial documents, he realized. She was building a case against him, looking for any excuse to claim he was mismanaging Amy's trust fund. She wouldn't find anything. Kyle kept meticulous records and had never touched a penny of Amy's trust except for legitimate expenses like her therapy and art camp. After 20 minutes of fruitless searching, Vera left the house, locking the door behind her. Kyle sat in his car, rage and disgust warring in his chest. He had it all on video now. Vera drugging Amy, coaching her to create false memories, breaking into his office. It was enough to go to the police tonight, but something held him back. This evidence would stop Vera, yes. She'd be arrested, probably convicted. But would that be enough? She'd poisoned his daughter's mind against him, caused Amy weeks of confusion and fear. She'd desecrated Laura's memory by creating these fictional abuse scenarios. And then there was the question that had been gnawing at Kyle since last night. Laura's accident. Kyle had accepted the official explanation 3 years ago because he'd had no reason to doubt it. But now, knowing what Vera was capable of, knowing the lengths she'd go to for money and control, he wondered. Laura had been at Vera's house that night. The last person to see her alive had been Vera. The roads had been wet, but Laura was a careful driver, and she'd left Vera's house upset. He remembered that from the text she'd sent. "Mom and I had a fight. Heading home. Love you." What if Laura's death hadn't been an accident? What if Vera had killed her own daughter? The thought seemed insane, but Kyle couldn't shake it. If Vera had wanted access to Laura's trust fund for Amy, Laura would have been an obstacle. The trust specified Kyle as the trustee, not Vera. With Laura alive, there was no way Vera could get her hands on that money. But with Laura dead and Kyle out of the picture, Vera would have full control over Amy and her inheritance. Kyle made a decision. He wasn't going to just turn Vera over to the police. He was going to investigate Laura's death. And if he found what he suspected, he was going to make sure Vera paid for everything she'd done. He started his car and drove home. When he quietly entered the house and went to Amy's room, he found her deeply asleep, her breathing steady. He searched her desk and found the small bottle Vera had been using, hidden in a box of colored pencils. He pocketed it carefully. Then he sat on the edge of Amy's bed, looking at his daughter's face, peaceful in sleep. "I'm gonna fix this," he whispered. "I promise." Amy stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Kyle left the room and went downstairs to his office. He had a lot of work to do. 3 days later, Kyle sat in Anthony Daly's office, reviewing the results. The bottle's contents had been analyzed. Lorazepam, a powerful benzodiazepine used to treat anxiety. In therapeutic doses prescribed by a doctor, it was safe. But Vera had been giving Amy doses high enough to create suggestibility and memory impairment, essentially drugging her into a state where false memories could be implanted. "This is textbook abuse," Anthony said, sliding the toxicology report across his desk. "Combined with your video evidence, you could have Vera arrested today." "Not yet," Kyle said. He pulled out a folder he'd been compiling. "I need you to investigate Laura's death." Anthony's eyebrows rose. "Your wife? I thought that was ruled an accident. I think Vera killed her." Kyle opened the folder, showing Anthony his notes. "Laura left Vera's house upset that night. She texted me about an argument. What if that argument was about money? What if Vera tried to get Laura to change the trust and Laura refused?" "That's a big leap, Kyle." "Is it? Vera's been systematically destroying Amy's mental health to get custody and access to that trust fund. You think murder is beyond her?" Anthony was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to find?" "Everything. I want the police reports from the accident investigation. I want to know if there were any inconsistencies that were overlooked. I want Vera's financial records from around that time. Did she have money problems? Motive? I want phone records showing her communications with Laura that day." Kyle leaned forward. "And I want you to interview the accident investigator. 3 years later, maybe they'll remember something that didn't sit right. This is going to take time and money. I have both." Kyle's voice was steel. "If Vera killed Laura and has spent 3 years trying to steal Amy from me, I want to know. And I want proof." Anthony nodded slowly. "All right, I'll start digging. But Kyle, even if we find something suspicious, reopening a closed case is difficult. The DA would need compelling new evidence. Then let's find it." Over the next 2 weeks, Kyle maintained his routine. He pretended not to know about Vera's nightly visits, continued working, continued trying to connect with Amy, though his daughter remained distant and fearful. Every night, he watched the camera feeds, documenting each of Vera's sessions. The false memories she was implanting grew more detailed and disturbing. Meanwhile, Anthony worked his investigation. He started with the police reports from Laura's accident. The investigating officer, a detective Randall Marshall, had since retired but agreed to meet with Anthony. Anthony reported back to Kyle over coffee at their usual diner. Marshall remembers the case, says it bothered him at the time, but he didn't have enough for anything more than an accident ruling. What bothered him? The car's brake lines. They were damaged in the crash, naturally, but Marshall said the damage looked odd to him, like they might have been tampered with before the accident, then further damaged when the car went off the road. Anthony pulled out his notes. He consulted with a mechanic at the time, but the mechanic said he couldn't be certain. The damage was too extensive. Kyle's pulse quickened. "So, it's possible the brakes were sabotaged?" "Possible." Marshall also said Vera buyers called him multiple times in the days after the accident, asking about the investigation, about whether they'd ruled out foul play. He found out at the time, most family members don't call asking if the police suspect murder unless they're worried about being suspected themselves. What about financial records? That's where it gets interesting. Anthony slid a document across the table. 3 years ago, Vera was overleveraged. Her real estate empire was built on borrowed money, and the 2008 recession hit her hard. She was facing bankruptcy. Multiple properties were underwater, banks were calling in loans. So she needed money desperately. Exactly. And Laura had just inherited $200,000 from her grandmother, money that went into the trust for Amy after Laura died. If Laura had been alive, Vera might have borrowed from her or even convinced her to invest in Vera's failing business. Kyle felt sick. The picture was becoming clearer. So Vera kills Laura to trigger the life insurance and try to get access to Amy's trust fund to save her business. "It's a theory," Anthony said carefully, "but we don't have proof. We need something concrete." "What about phone records?" "Working on it, but they're 3 years old. It's not easy to get them without a warrant, and we don't have grounds for that yet. Kyle sat back, thinking. He needed more. He needed something that would definitively prove Vera had killed Laura. Then an idea struck him. Vera's car. The Mercedes she drives. How long has she had it? Anthony checked his notes. She bought it 4 months after Laura died. Used some of the insurance money from Laura's estate. There was a small policy that paid out to Vera as next of kin. Why? Because if she sabotaged Laura's brakes, she might have done it at her own house, where Laura parked that night. There might be evidence in Vera's garage, tools, brake fluid, something. After 3 years? Unlikely. Maybe. But Vera's compulsive about keeping records. I've seen her house. She has files going back decades. What if she kept something? A receipt for tools purchased that week, security camera footage from her driveway. Anthony's eyes lit up. Security cameras. That's good. If Vera had cameras 3 years ago, the footage might be backed up somewhere. She definitely had cameras. Laura mentioned them. Vera was paranoid about property crime in her neighborhood. I'll check into it, Anthony said. But Kyle, even if we find footage, it might not show anything conclusive. And we can't exactly break into her house looking for evidence. No, Kyle agreed. But we can use what we have to pressure her into making a mistake. A plan was forming in his mind. It was risky, possibly illegal, but he was past caring. Vera had taken everything from him. His wife, his daughter's love and trust. 3 years of his life. She deserved whatever happened next. Keep investigating, Kyle told Anthony. I'm going to handle Vera my way. Kyle scheduled a meeting with Vera, texting her that he wanted to discuss Amy's well-being. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Vera arrived precisely on time, dressed in an expensive navy suit, her expression pleasant but guarded. She sat across from Kyle in a corner booth, ordering green tea when the waitress came by. Thank you for meeting with me, Kyle began, keeping his voice level and friendly. I'm worried about Amy. Her therapist says she's been regressing. I've noticed that too, Vera said, her tone full of false concern. Perhaps the problem is her environment at home. Amy's mentioned to me that she feels stressed living with you. Has she? Kyle sipped his coffee, watching Vera carefully. That's interesting, because Amy used to love being home. It's only in the last month that she's changed. Children grow and change, Vera said smoothly. As they get older, they need different things. Amy's at an age where she needs a maternal figure. I've been thinking, perhaps it would be best if she came to live with me for a while. Give you both some space. You've been thinking that for a while, haven't you? Kyle said, his voice still pleasant. In fact, you've been working pretty hard to make that happen. Vera's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Caution. I don't know what you mean. Kyle pulled out his phone and placed it on the table between them, screen facing up. He pressed play on a video clip. Vera in Amy's room, handing her the medicine, telling her to remember the truth about Kyle. Vera's face went pale, then flushed with anger. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting my daughter from you. Kyle's voice hardened. I know what you're doing. The lorazepam, the false memory implantation, the coaching sessions. I have hours of video evidence. I have the drug you've been giving her, analyzed by a toxicology lab. I have enough to have you arrested for child abuse, drugging a minor, trespassing, and a dozen other charges. Vera recovered her composure quickly, leaning back in her seat. You're bluffing. That video could be faked. And even if it's real, I'll say I was giving Amy vitamins that you drugged to frame me. I have the best lawyers in the city. You're a single father who works from home and has been spying on his own house. Who do you think a jury will believe? Maybe you're right, Kyle said. Maybe you could beat those charges. But I wonder how you'd beat a murder charge. Vera went very still. What are you talking about? Laura, my wife, your daughter. Kyle watched her face carefully. I've been investigating her accident. Turns out it might not have been an accident after all. You're insane. Am I? The investigating detective had concerns about the brake lines on Laura's car. The damage looked like sabotage, but the crash destroyed too much evidence to be certain. You called that detective repeatedly after the accident, asking if they suspected foul play. Why would you do that, Vera? Worried you'd left evidence behind. I was concerned about my daughter's death, Vera said. but her voice had lost its confidence. You were concerned about getting caught, Kyle countered. Because you killed Laura? You needed money, your business was failing, and you were facing bankruptcy. Laura had inherited money from her grandmother, money that went into a trust for Amy. If Laura was alive, you couldn't access it. But with her dead, you figured you could get custody of Amy and control that money. This is fantasy, Vera said, but she was gripping her teacup so hard her knuckles were white. You have no proof. Not yet, Kyle admitted, but I'm working on it. I'm going to find evidence, Vera, and when I do, you're going to prison for murdering your own daughter. Vera stood abruptly. This conversation is over. And if you come near me or Amy with these ridiculous accusations, I'll have a restraining order issued. I'll tell the court you've become paranoid and delusional. I'll use your own video surveillance as proof that you're unstable. She left without paying for her tea. Kyle sat alone in the booth, processing what he'd seen in her face. She'd been scared. Just for a moment, when he'd mentioned Laura's brakes, genuine fear had flashed across her features. She'd done it. He was sure now. Vera had killed Laura. His phone rang. It was Anthony. I found something, the investigator said without preamble. Vera's home security system from 3 years ago. It backed up to a cloud service. The company still has the archived footage. I need a warrant to access it legally, but I know a guy who can get it without one. Do it, Kyle said. Whatever it costs. Kyle, if this footage shows what we think it shows, we're talking about murder. We need to involve the police at that point. We will, but I want to see it first. I want to know for certain. 2 days later, Kyle and Anthony sat in Anthony's office, watching footage from Vera's driveway cameras from 3 years ago, the night Laura died. The timestamp read 8:15 p.m. Laura's car was parked in Vera's driveway. The garage door was open, and Vera was inside, bent over something. Kyle's stomach turned as he realized she was working on Laura's car. The camera angle didn't show exactly what she was doing, but she was under the front end, where the brake lines would be. She worked for about 15 minutes, glancing at the door to the house repeatedly. Then she straightened, holding what looked like a wrench, and closed the garage door. She disappeared into the house. At 8:43 p.m., Laura emerged from the house, clearly upset. Even in the grainy footage, Kyle could see her wiping tears from her face. She got in her car and drove away. 90 minutes later, she was dead. Kyle's hands shook as Anthony paused the video. That's it, he said quietly. That's proof. She murdered Laura. It's circumstantial, Anthony warned. A defense attorney could argue she was doing routine maintenance on Laura's car as a favor. We need more to make this stick. Then we'll get more, Kyle said. But first, I'm going to make Vera confess. Ow! I'm going to give her what she wants, Kyle said. Custody of Amy. Anthony stared at him. You can't be serious. Not really, Kyle clarified. But I'm going to make her think she's won. And when she thinks she's safe, when she thinks she's gotten away with everything, I'm going to spring the trap. The next day, Kyle called Vera. His voice was defeated, broken. You win. I can't fight you anymore. Amy clearly wants to be with you. I'll sign over temporary custody. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Vera said, cautious but eager, That's very mature of you, Kyle. It's what's best for Amy. I know, he said, putting every ounce of false despair into his voice. I just want her to be happy. Can we meet to discuss the arrangements? Maybe at your house. I'd like to see where Amy will be living. Of course, Vera said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Come by tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. Kyle hung up and immediately called Anthony. I need you to wire me for sound. And I need you to have police on standby nearby. Tomorrow night, Vera's going to confess to everything. How can you be sure? Because people who think they've won get careless, Kyle said. And I'm going to push every button she has until she breaks. The next evening, Kyle drove to Vera's house, a large colonial in an upscale neighborhood west of the city. He was wearing a small recording device that Anthony had provided, sophisticated enough to pick up clear audio even in a large room. Vera greeted him at the door, her smile magnanimous. Kyle, come in. Her house was, as he remembered, expensively furnished, cold, every surface perfect. She led him to her study, offering him a drink, which he declined. I've had my lawyer draw up temporary custody papers, Vera said, pulling a folder from her desk. If you sign these, Amy can move in with me this weekend. I'll enroll her in a better school. Make sure she has everything she needs. Including lies about me? Kyle said quietly. Vera's smile didn't falter. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Kyle stood, walking to her mantel, where photos of Laura at various ages were displayed. You've been poisoning Amy against me, making her believe I hurt Laura, that I'm dangerous. You've been drugging her, manipulating her memories. These are serious accusations, Vera said, her voice hardening. Accusations you can't prove. Actually, I can. Kyle turned to face her. I have video of you drugging Amy. I have toxicology reports of the lorazepam you've been giving her. I have recordings of you coaching her to lie about me. But that's not why I'm really here. Then why are you here? I want to know why you killed Laura. Vera's face went blank. Get out. No. Kyle stepped closer. I want to hear you say it. You killed your own daughter. You sabotaged her brakes and sent her driving on a rainy night on a dangerous road. All for money. You can't prove any of that, Vera said, but her voice shook slightly. Yes, I can. Kyle pulled out his phone and showed her the security footage. That's you, working on Laura's car the night she died. That's you murdering her. Vera watched the footage, her face growing paler. When it ended, she sank into her chair. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she looked up at Kyle, and all the false warmth was gone from her eyes. What remained was cold calculation. Laura was weak, Vera said flatly. She threw away every opportunity one gave her. Married you, a nobody with no prospects. Had a child she couldn't afford. She was wasting the family money on art supplies and charity while my business was collapsing. Kyle's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. So you killed her. She wouldn't listen to reason, Vera continued, as if Kyle hadn't spoken. That night, I asked her to invest in my company. $50,000 from the inheritance her grandmother left her. It would have saved everything. But she refused. Said she was putting all of it into a trust for Amy, keeping you as the trustee. Vera's voice dripped with contempt. Choosing you over her own mother. So you cut her brake lines. I loosened them enough that they'd fail on the drive home, Vera said, her voice eerily calm. That curve on Highway 26. I knew if she lost her brakes there, the crash would look like an accident. And it did. Kyle felt sick hearing her admit it so coldly. And when that didn't get you the money, you decided to take Amy from me. You were always the obstacle, Vera said. If you were out of the picture, I'd have custody of Amy and control over trust. I could save my company, secure my future. Amy would be fine. I'd give her a good life. Better than you could provide. By drugging her? By making her fear me? By making her understand the truth, that you're not worthy of her. Vera stood, her composure returning. But none of this matters. That video you showed me? It doesn't prove anything. And this conversation is my word against yours. Kyle smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. No, it's not. This conversation is on record. He pulled aside his collar, showing the small microphone. Every word you just said. Vera's face went white. You're recording me? Illegally? Very illegally, Kyle agreed. But I don't care. Because in about 30 seconds, the police are going to arrive with a warrant for your arrest. You just confessed to first-degree murder and child abuse. Your fancy lawyers won't be able to save you from this. You bastard, Vera hissed, lunging at him. Kyle sidestepped easily, and, at that moment, the doorbell rang. Through the window, he could see police cars pulling up, lights flashing. Kyle walked to the door and opened it. Detective Marshall, the now-retired officer who had investigated Laura's death, stood there with two uniformed officers. Marshall had been easy to convince to come out of retirement for this. He'd always known something was wrong with Laura's accident. Vera Byers, Marshall said, stepping into the house. You're under arrest for the murder of Laura Mason and for child abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Kyle watched as they handcuffed Vera. She was screaming now about illegal recordings and entrapment and persecution. But her words fell on deaf ears. As they led her to the police car, Vera locked eyes with Kyle one last time. You've destroyed me, she said. No, Kyle replied quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you paid for it. 3 months later, Kyle sat in Dr. Joyce Gorman's office, waiting for Amy's session to finish. Through the door, he could hear the murmur of conversation. Amy's voice, younger and lighter than it had been in months. The door opened, and Amy emerged, followed by Dr. Gorman. Amy ran to Kyle and hugged him, something she hadn't done since before Vera's campaign of manipulation. "Hey, sweetheart," Kyle said, holding her tight. "Dr. Gorman says I'm making great progress," Amy said, pulling back to look at him. "The nightmares are almost gone." "That's wonderful." Kyle looked at the therapist, who nodded encouragingly. "Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Amy asked. "Absolutely." In the car, Amy was chatty, telling him about her art project and about her friend Shannon's birthday party next week. It was like having his daughter back. Vera's trial was set to begin in 2 months. The DA had a strong case. Kyle's recordings, the security footage, testimony from Detective Marshall about the suspicious brake damage, and evidence of the low razepam doses Vera had been giving Amy. Vera's lawyers were trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA was pushing for maximum charges. Kyle didn't care what happened to Vera at this point. She was out of their lives, and that was enough. That evening, after Amy went to bed, Kyle sat in his office, looking at a photo of Laura. "I got her," he said softly. "I got justice for you, and I protected Amy. I hope you can rest easier now." He put the photo down and opened his laptop. He had work to catch up on, projects he'd neglected during the investigation. Life was returning to normal. But normal was better than it had been in years. Amy was healing. He was healing. And Vera would spend the rest of her life paying for her crimes. Justice, Kyle thought, felt pretty damn good. 2 months later, Kyle sat in the courtroom as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. Amy was with Dr. Gorman in a private room. They decided the trial itself would be too traumatic for her, but Kyle wanted to be there to see it through. In the matter of the state versus Vera Byers, on the count of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. On all counts of child abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. Vera showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. She sat ramrod straight in her expensive suit, staring at the judge. "Mrs. Byers," the judge said, "you will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. Given the nature of these crimes, the murder of your own daughter and the systematic abuse of your granddaughter, I anticipate the sentencing will reflect the full extent of the law." Vera was led away in handcuffs. As she passed Kyle's row, she didn't look at him. Outside the courthouse, Anthony Daly waited with a congratulatory handshake. "It's over," the investigator said. "She'll get 25 to life, minimum." "It should have been death penalty," Kyle said, but there was no heat in his voice. He was just tired. "You did good, Kyle. You saved Amy and got justice for Laura. That's what matters." Kyle nodded. "Thank you for everything, Anthony. I couldn't have done this without you." "Anytime." Anthony paused. "What now?" "Now." Kyle smiled genuinely for the first time in months. "Now I go pick up my daughter from therapy, take her home, make her favorite dinner, and watch her be a kid again. That's all I want." He walked to his car, feeling lighter than he had in years. The nightmare was over. Vera was going to prison, probably for the rest of her life. Amy was recovering, learning to trust him again, learning that the memories Vera had planted weren't real. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, nights when Amy woke up screaming, convinced Kyle was dangerous, and he'd had to talk her down gently, reminding her what Dr. Gorman had explained about false memories. But slowly, week by week, Amy was coming back to herself. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge gave Vera 30 years to life. She would be 92 before she was eligible for parole. Kyle didn't attend the sentencing. He was at Amy's art show at her summer camp, watching her present a painting she'd made, a landscape of a beach at sunset, remarkably similar to the style Laura had once painted in. "It's for you, Dad," Amy said, presenting it to him after the show. Dr. Gorman said, "Making art helps me process feelings. So I painted this. It's like the end of a storm, the sun coming out again." Kyle looked at the painting, at the brilliant oranges and pinks of the sky, the calm water, the peaceful beach. "It's beautiful, Amy. Thank you. I'm glad Grandma can't hurt us anymore," Amy said quietly. Dr. Gorman explained what she did to me. "I don't really remember it all clearly anymore, but I know she made me believe things that weren't true. I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from that sooner. You protected me when it mattered, Amy said, leaning against him. You saved me, Dad. They stood together, looking at the painting, Amy's artwork, Laura's legacy, their future together. The storm was over. The sun was out again. And Kyle Mason had won. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.